Thank you so much for joining us today at Christpoint Church. We want you to know we're real people living real lives serving a real God. We hope that you enjoy today's sermon by our lead pastor, Steve Qualls. Welcome home.
Samson finds 300 of these things. Now, I don't know that I've ever seen 300 of them ever. In my life, but he finds 300 of these things, catches them, ties them together, puts torches between their tails, and completely burns down all of the harvest for the enemy. He took the smallest of animals to defeat the largest of enemies. When we think everything that's coming against us is large, just remember, God takes the smallest and insignificant to confound the largest and the wise. He's very good at it. He knows what he's doing. So this 300 Foxfire team of Samson's burned down the Philistines' harvest of grain. This is important. Their fields of grain and their olive harvest. So I don't know if you're picking up on this, but the Philistines were a very large enemy. Now Samson did use that smallest of foxes to leave them without a means to make their bread. Now the main ingredient in making bread for those days was some grain and some oil. So they removed the grain, they removed the oil. He burned those down. He burned the harvest down. He burned the standing. He burned the ones that were heaped, the ones that were ready for harvest, the ones that were not reaped for harvest yet. So this field's partially done. This one's completely done. All it has to do is just sit there, and then we could take the grain to the bins, and he burned those down. And if it's harvest time for wheat, it's harvest time for olives. And he burned down the olive groves. Two main ingredients that make the bread. So let's jump back we went to Samson. Now let's jump back to Solomon. Jump back to his foxes. See, let me explain something to you about how foxes work. I didn't know this. I had to do some research, and a friend of mine actually told me about this about 6-8 months ago. And I'm like, "Do you care if I steal that?" I don't know why I'm asking you if I could steal it, because if I was going to steal it, I wouldn't ask you. So he said, "Absolutely." So here's what happens: the foxes will feed on the tender grapes that hang from the vine. Now, I don't know if you noticed about this or not, but this vine will be planted here, but its vines will go forever. But the actual root system is here. The root system doesn't continue to root. It just continues to vine. So they wait. Now, foxes aren't interested in the blooms. That's not appealing to them. They have a taste for it. They don't care about the flower or the leaf. All they care about is to devour the harvest, the grape, the tender grape. Not only do they devour the tender grapes, they burrow into the ground. They burrow into the ground, and when they do that, they begin to burrow into where the root system is for the plant, for the vine. And when they burrow into that root system beneath the surface, they begin to start severing nutrients that are vital to that vine, are vital to the harvest. See, here's the thing. The farmer or the vine dresser may not even notice this, because he's got a big vineyard. He looks out there. He may not even notice that there's holes dug that burrow in, that's cutting off nutrients to his vine, and his vines look pretty good. Then all of a sudden he goes through a season. Then all of a sudden he gets to the end to realize that I let the foxes in. And they not only destroyed the vine, but they destroyed the harvest. Because what's happened now is the grapes come on, they look pretty decent for a little while, then all of a sudden there's no nutrients going to them, and then they begin to start rotting or withering on the vine. See, unknowingly, these foxes attack the foundation of the plant. They attack the integrity of the plant. The vine will produce leaves. So it produces leaves. It goes through a process. It will bloom. It goes through that process. It will go through this process throughout the growing season. Now, let's just imagine that us being in January, first service, first Sunday of 2021, we're in the planting season of this year. We're in the planting season, and we don't need to get to the end of this year and wonder where our harvest is, and then look back and say, I should have protected the harvest, when the harvest wasn't even thought of. I should have protected the harvest at the planting, at the beginning. So it will go through its process. It will look decent. It will look good. And I'll give you a good example of this. My mother and my father, when I was a kid, I came in from school and they stick their beans in the garden. We had a garden. That's what we lived off of. So they stick their beans. I remember that thing growing, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was beautiful. I remember thinking as a kid, wow, that's pretty. The most beautiful vines. Not one time did any bean ever grow on those. My mom and dad went through that whole season, worked for everything, and never even had a bean grow. I don't know what they got, but they got beautiful vines. I don't know. I think they were sticking morning glories. I'm not exactly sure. So, and they were very skilled at this, by the way. So, by the time the grapes began to start producing, see, the host plant has already been compromised by severing the nutrients. See, the plant is under attack from a lack of nourishment. I'm getting somewhere. So the fruit is either eaten at that point, it's either eaten or it withers on the vine. See, a vine dresser, he's not interested in fruit that's not ripe or fruit that doesn't produce. If he pulls that off there and it's not ready, he can't use that. So there's a specific time period that the harvest can be made in, and outside of that harvest, outside of that time frame, the harvest is not going. It's either going to rot on the vine, or it's going to wither on the vine, or it's not going to be any good to start with, or it's going to be consumed. So during that time, the foxes eat away at those tender grapes. The fruit is either eaten or it withers on the vine. And all of this happens, get this, all of this happens because the little things are left unattended. It all happens because the little things are left unattended, and I'll call these little G's. This is what I call little G's. You're like, what is little G's? Let me clarify that for you. It's not a rapper. Little G's are the little gods in our lives. See, we run from the big things. Let's just say, and I don't want to overuse this, let's just say addiction. Well, I run from the big thing that I know will drag me back. But do I run from the little G's? Do I run from the little things, the continued conversations, maybe the continued contacts? Do I run from the little G's, what I watch, what I listen to, what I allow in? See, the little G's in our lives that seem to be cute and innocent with bushy tails. See, it's the little foxes that spoil the vine. Because let me explain something to you. If the weatherman says that there is going to be a heavy freeze during the spring, then the farmer begins to start covering the plants. He begins to start, they do all kinds of things. They spray their plants down to allow them the water to freeze to protect them from being frostbitten. But if you don't know something's happening, those little things that are happening right under your noses because they're cute and they're bushy-tailed, these are the things that will start deteriorating and start attacking the harvest. Almost before the harvest even has a chance to even start growing. See, they first appear small and insignificant. So they look small, they look insignificant. They come at you, and you're like, oh, that's really not a big deal. See, the little G's demand our attention, and they absorb our focus slowly over time. The little G's, the little gods in our lives, demand our attention, and they absorb our focus just a little bit, and a little bit more, and a little bit more over time. Let's just say I spend a little bit too much time on Facebook. You know what? That's a little G. That's okay. That's okay. But we start realizing at the harvest, why am I not getting a harvest? Because I poured more time into what somebody else's life, what was going on in someone else's life, than I did the Word into my life. So I'm going to make you a challenge, 21 days of prayer and fasting. Maybe we need to fast social media. Maybe we need to fast something that's pulling our attention away from the Lord. So these little G's, see, we ignore the fact that they are slowly eating away at our victory. They're slowly eating away at our victory. And remember, let's get this right. Our relationship, it depends on this. All that the vineyard produces is under attack by the little things and all that they destroy. The problem with the little G's is that they're like foxes. They seem harmless. Oh, they're harmless. They're harmless. You know what? I can pull that up on my computer. My wife will never know. You know what? I don't know how to get it off if I were to get it up there. So everybody would know about it. So see, they'll never know. See, their attack is hidden. I'll just do this in the quiet. I'll do this when nobody's around. You know what? It's okay if I do this instead of that. See, and by the time we notice their danger, the damage has already been well underway. It's already been done, and it's well underway. They show up. Let me show you how they show up. This is what they show up in the form of sometimes work. Well, I have to go to work today. Have you ever read my book? I don't know what chapter it is, but you know what? I chose to go to work rather than go into prayer to lay hands on a man to maybe possibly see him healed. You know what I chose? I chose not to offend customers rather than to offend God. So this is what I'm talking about. Sometimes little G's show up in work because we justify it. It's a good thing. You know what? Maybe I tell guys all the time. I had a guy call me the other day. What should I do about this job and this job? I said, any job that keeps you out of church, I would stay away from. That's just, I'm telling you straight up. Because your soul and the condition of your soul is worth more than a few more dollars. So figure out how or go in there and tell them I'm not working. You want to see what that challenge looks like? You go to Sam Scavo, and he'll show you what the challenge looks like. He's been employed by this company for 14, 16 years, I don't know. And he told them, he said, don't make me choose between my God, my church, and my job. And this is the man that has to have his job. And he told them, don't make me choose. So sometimes these little G's show up in the form of work. Sometimes they show up in the form of play. You know what? Well, I had to go play today. I didn't have time to do my studies or do my devotions because I had to go play. Recreation, hobbies. You know, I had to go do this instead of being faithful to what God's called me to be. You know, sometimes they show up in hurt. You know, I'm just hurt by what so and so said. So we harbor that hurt because it's fuzzy and it's pretty and it has a bushy tail. We harbor that hurt and it begins to start plowing away at the harvest. Maybe it looks like indifference where you just don't care. You just don't care. See, I'm going to tell you what the one that drives me crazy. It drives me crazy in me is laziness. Yeah, I just don't care. I can do anything. We can work with addictions, man. We can pray for you we can pray with you over this situation and that situation, but if you don't even care, if you are lazy and you don't even care, you know, why aren't you serving the Lord? Well, I don't know. I just kind of got tired of it. You got tired of the King of Kings. You got tired of the Lord of Lords. You got tired of serving the Creator of the universe and the Savior and the lover of our souls. You got tired? I mean, you know, is that what you're going to tell the Lord when you stand before Him? When He says, you know what, I'm sorry. Maybe I got tired of you. You know, I'm sorry, you know, maybe I'm going to quote Scripture to you and tell you that, you know what, if you are ashamed of me before men, then I'll be ashamed of you before my Father in heaven. But if you acknowledge me before men, then I will acknowledge you before my Father in heaven. Now, which one did you choose? Well, I don't know. Well, you know what, He's going to look at you and He's going to say, I think you chose a little God. I think you chose the little G's. Call it a rapper if you want to, but I think you chose little G. Little G and what's behind door number one over the King of Kings and the Savior of my soul. See, before you know it, they're nipping away so much at our life until we finally realize that we've handed the torch to the enemy to burn down our own fields. Well, I don't understand what's going on in my life. I know I've told you this story before, but there's a lot of new people, a lot of new listeners. Somebody told us one time, said, I don't know why I can't get my son into church. And I'm like, because all your son has ever known is baseball, ball tournaments, AAU. He's never been in church. And now you can't get him in church when he's 15, 16 years old and he's never known church. I think, you know what, where's his baseball now? And I'm a baseball player. Well, I used to be. I mean, that was my jam. You know, I loved it. But you know what? That's not going to keep me in a relationship with the Lord. So we handed the torch to the enemy to burn down our own fields and then cry because our own fields are burned down. Well, I don't understand why my fields are burned down. Well, stop giving the enemy the torch. How about that? See, you can't make bread without oil, and you can't make it without grain. Your grain has to be produced, and has to be gone through a process and crushed. And the oil has to be crushed. The olive oil or the olive has to be crushed. The oil has to be crushed. The grain has to be crushed. You will never produce wine without grapes either. You could try all you want to, but you're not going to make wine without grapes. Notice the vineyard can withstand. I'm going to show you what the vineyard can withstand. The vineyard can withstand storms. Well, there's going to be a lightning storm tonight. Nobody covers up their vineyards. There's going to be a terrible storm. Nobody goes out there and begins to start propping them up. You notice something else? The grapes will hang on during the harshest of winds. Man, the grapes are there. They'll hang on. A vine will take nutrients. Now, I want you to realize this. Explain this and try to figure out why, and try to understand why you're not God. A vine will take nutrients from the ground, from a bitter ground. I don't know, have you ever grabbed up just a handful of dirt and ate it? We dared each other when we were kids, so we know what dirt tastes like. We wonder why we had everything wrong with us. We wonder why we have nothing wrong with us now. But God designed a vine to take nutrients from a bitter soil and turn it into the sweetest of fruit. Now, I don't understand that. You tell me how that happens. There is no sugar poured on that ground, but it takes the bitterness of the soil and turns it into the sweetest of fruit. Now, only God can do that. So the vine can withstand storms. The grapes can withstand the harshest of winds and not even break in any form or fashion. And the vine can produce from the ground, from the bitter soil, the sweetest of fruit. Yet the greatest danger is done through the smallest of little bitty enemies, little intruders. The word for 2021 is connect. Let's make a connection. That's the word for 21, is let's reconnect. Let's stay connected. And I'm going to tell you, Tina's the one, my wife's the one that started saying that. And, I usually listen to her. Sometimes, I don't know, she said something one time, I don't know what it was. But I listen to her when it comes to these things. And when she starts resonating something, then, hey, that's the Lord saying that's what you need to focus on in this next season, is connection. See, the word for 21 is connection. This is a time to connect and to reconnect, not disconnect. Let me explain something to you. I think I used this about 6 years ago. The sequoia and redwood trees out in the Pacific Northwest, they have a unique root system. I don't know if you've ever seen them. I have. They're hundreds of feet tall. They are the most majestic things you'll ever see. Yet their roots are only 6 to 12 feet deep. Now, get something with me. They have no taproot. Now, contrary to a yucca plant, believe me, take your bush hog, run over a yucca plant, and you'll think you hit a dog. So they have a root system that goes down about 28 feet, I think. But a sequoia that stands, or a redwood that stands hundreds of feet into the air, only has a root system that's about 10 feet deep. The General Sherman, largest tree, it's very popular out in California, Northern California. It's 275 feet tall, 25 feet wide, and 2,500 years old. The redwoods are 300 plus feet tall. They weigh 500 tons, and they withstand flooding, tornadoes, droughts, earthquakes, lightning, fires for thousands of years, and only have a root system 10 feet deep. How can they survive all of those storms? How can they survive over and over and over fires? You know why they survive fires? Is because they're too tall for the fires to even hurt them. The fires actually help them because it clears out everything that's fighting for nutrients. It clears it out. So they're above that. They've already put their time in. So they survive by locking their root systems together. Now, this is how they survive. This is how they have grown for thousands of years. They don't go deep. They go into one another. And this one can't blow over because this one won't let it. And these two can't blow over because this one won't allow it to. So their root systems intertwine and lock together until they cannot be destroyed. See, every tree's roots lock arms with the other, like an army. Like an army. And you know what? God kind of designed it that way. They've stood for thousands of years because of their connection to the other that is like-minded. So when we talk about connection going into 21, we have to be connected with someone who's like-minded, someone who's going to pray with us, someone who's going to speak Jesus with us and into us. We've got to lock arms with somebody that's going to stand stronger than we do during the storms because they're coming. So we've got to lock arms or we're going to fall. Because I'm going to tell you something, the taproot by itself won't hold that kind of a tree. But the rest of them will. Connection is so important, and I want you to get this, that God made our largest single living organism on this planet, not a group, but a single living organism on this planet, not only dependent upon connection, but it thrives because of connection. It thrives because of connection. Foxes will destroy that connection if we will allow them to. I promise you, this is what will happen. Foxes are axes that begin to start chopping at the trees. I don't care how big the tree is, after a while, you chop through it. You may not know, the tree may not even be phased by the first day's chopping, but by the time you get about 2 weeks into it, it's about ready to fall. Oh, I didn't even notice somebody was chopping. We didn't notice these little things, these little G's, these little foxes. So let me ask you this. What's the little G in your life that you got to deal with? Because I want to challenge us. If we're not being challenged in services, then I'm failing. So I want to challenge us. Is the little G's in my life, do they look like career? Do they look like jobs? And let me explain something to you. I'm a parent and a grandparent when I say this. Do they look like kids? Do the little G's, the things I worship more than the Lord, do they look like the kids? Do they look like hobbies? See, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 8, verse 20, He said, foxes have holes and birds have nests. He said, the birds of the air have nests and foxes have holes. In other words, little G's will look for a place to live. Little G's, little foxes will look for a place to make their home. See, they'll make their home where we don't want them to make their home, if we will allow it. Foxes make holes in the ground, and then they live in these holes in the ground. And when they get in these holes in the ground, they will destroy other things if we give them the chance. I challenge you, I'm going to challenge you straight up to begin this year by clearing out the fields. Maybe take a good long walk and a good hard look into the vineyard that is our life and our family and our relationship with the Lord. Remember, all of a sudden we've got a love story playing out in chapter 2 of Song of Solomon. We've got a love story playing out, and all of a sudden we just digress and we say, look, let's fight for the vineyard, because there's always attacks on the vineyard. There's always attacks on the relationship. Because the devil fights hardest where he fears most, and he don't always come at us with a vibrated tail and a pitchfork. He comes at us like little foxes, like little G's. See, some storms are out of our control. We have no control. You cannot control a virus. You cannot control a storm. You cannot control, and we saw our state took a terrible hit on tornadoes back in March. Cookeville, White County, and then down in Chattanooga, we took a terrible hit. We couldn't control that. But what we can do is lock arms through it. That's how we make it through it. No one's ever destroyed. Their faith doesn't get destroyed because of storms. Their faith gets destroyed because they start letting the little G's take over. That's how their faith is destroyed. Some storms are out of our control. We have nothing. We can't, no matter what we do, we have to live through it. But little G's are our responsibility, and we wonder why our fields are burning down. It's because we didn't deal with them in the planting. See, what happens today in planting season will have a direct impact on what produces in harvest. Now, I want to end with this little. We would would take a trip by this huge pumpkin field. We'd never seen it in pumpkins before, and it was a lot of acres. I'm guessing somewhere around 100 acres. And at first we're like, what is planted in it? Is it turnips or is it squash? You know. Then all of a sudden we start seeing the pumpkins coming over. So I think it's pumpkins. So we would make trips through there quite often, maybe every 2 weeks or so, because we would go do some of our routes when we were in business right past it. Then one day we're out. We're like, man, this thing is full of pumpkins. This guy had the entire field sold. The entire field sold. All he had to do was harvest it. And we've got, all of a sudden, out of the blue, we had an uncommon, uncharacteristic freeze that came just like that and killed half his harvest. He had to pretty much just throw half of his pumpkins away. They were ready to harvest. All he had to do was just put them in a bin and carry them to the sales yard. And we stopped by there and we're like, what's going on? And they're like, man, we got hit so hard by that freeze. It just completely destroyed our crop. We're lucky if we'll get half of our yield out of this. See, that he couldn't, that's something he couldn't do anything about. That's something that he couldn't do anything about, but you know what he could do something about? He put a fence up to make sure that people didn't drive in on his plants when they were tender. He put a fence up and made sure, and boarded it, made sure nobody would get in there. See, he kept the little foxes out. Sometimes the big things hit and we have no control over them. But what happens in planting season has a direct result on what happens and the amount of harvest that we yield in harvest season. I'm going to dare you and I'm going to challenge you to make a connection or make a reconnection, lock together, because more storms are going to come. I'm going to break your heart. Our storms didn't quit when we clicked over from 20 to 21. I'm sorry to tell you that. Our storms are not over. I don't think life's any easier. I think the easy days of life are probably way behind us. I think it's going to be a little tougher as we go forward. Don't make the mistake of thinking God will be okay with my half devotion. I mean, don't make that mistake that God is okay with my divided attention. Don't make that mistake. Don't make the mistake that the enemy only attacks at harvest and only with storms, because he attacks vehemently through the little G's. He's subtle and he's cunning, and take care of the foxes and the harvest will take care of itself. Just make sure the holes aren't dug in your field. Take an inventory. Give it a walk. Give it a walk over. And just look out over and say, look, my life is a field. And if I don't dig out some of the foxes, you know what? I'm going to have to deal with them later. Johnny Hood says, whatever problem goes away by itself, comes back by itself. So here's the thing. I better deal with the little foxes now, or I'm going to have to deal with a loss of harvest later. Hello again, and thank you for tuning in. I pray that today's sermon has spoken to your heart and has ministered to you well. We just want you to know that we have two locations, one at our Sparta campus, our main campus at Sparta on the square in Sparta, and our second campus is at Smithfield behind Ace Hardware. And we would love for you to call Christpoint Church your church home. And if you're viewing this and you can't get in to church and you feel like you want to be a part of the church, then you can always be a part of the church. Just drop us a note and let us know that you enjoy being on board with us. And if you'd like to give and be a part of the ministry, then you can do that by just sending a check to one of the locations at 614 Murphy Street, Smithfield, 13 Liberty Square in Sparta, and we'll get you on the road. We just love you so much, and you can download the Christpoint Church of Tennessee app and you can give online. So we are real people. We're living real lives, and we're serving a real God. And we just want to tell everyone, welcome home. We're so glad that you tuned in with us. Welcome home.